Chapter 3. The engineer, on the giving way of the net, had been swept away by a wave. His dog had disappeared at the same time. The faithful animal had of its own accord sprung to the rescue of its master. "Forward!" cried the reporter, and all four, forgetting weakness and fatigue, began their search. Poor Neb wept with grief and despair at the thought of having lost all that he loved in the world. Not more than 2 minutes had passed between the moment that Smith had disappeared, and the instant of his companion's landing. They were, therefore, hopeful of being in time to rescue him. "Hunt for him?" cried Nebraska. "Yes, Neb, and we will find him," replied Spilett. "Alive?" "Alive." "Can he swim?" demanded Pencroff. "Oh, yes," responded Nebraska, "and, besides, Top is with him." The sailor, looking at the roaring sea, shook his head. It was at a point northward from this shore, and about half a mile from the place where the castaways had landed, that the engineer had disappeared, and if he had come ashore at the nearest point it was at least that distance from where they now were. It was nearly 6 o'clock. The fog had risen and made the night very dark. The castaways followed northward along the shore of that land upon which chance had thrown them. A land unknown, whose geographical situation they could not guess. They walked upon a sandy soil, mixed with stones, seemingly destitute of any kind of vegetation. The ground, very uneven, seemed in certain places to be riddled with small holes, making the march very painful. From these holes, great, heavy flying birds rushed forth, and were lost in the darkness. Others, more active, rose in flocks, and fled away like the clouds. The sailor thought he recognized gulls and sea mews, whose sharp cries were audible above the raging of the sea. From time to time the castaways would stop and call, listening for an answering voice from the ocean. They thought, too, that if they were near the place where the engineer had been, washed ashore, and he had been unable to make any response, that, at least, the barking of the dog Top would have been heard. But no sound was distinguishable above the roaring of the waves and the thud of the surf. Then the little party would resume their march, searching all the windings of the shore. After a walk of 20 minutes the four castaways were suddenly stopped by a foaming line of breakers. They found themselves upon the extremity of a sharp point upon which the sea broke with fury. "This is a promontory," said the sailor, "and it will be necessary to turn back, keeping to the right in order to gain the main land." "But if he is there?" cried Neb, pointing towards the ocean, whose enormous waves showed white through the gloom. "Well, let us call again," and all together, uniting their voices, uttered a vigorous cry, but without response. They waited for a lull, and tried once more. And again there was no answer. Then the castaways turned back, following the opposite side of the promontory over ground equally sandy and rocky. However, Pencroff observed that the shore was bolder, that the land rose somewhat, and he thought that it might gradually slope up to the high hill which was dimly visible through the darkness. The birds were less numerous on this shore. The sea also seemed less surging and tempestuous, and it was noticeable that the agitation of the waves was subsiding. They hardly heard the sound of the surf, and doubtless, this side of the promontory formed a semicircular bay, protected by its sharp point from the long roll of the sea. But by following this direction they were walking towards the south, which was going away from that place where Smith would have landed. After a tramp of 1.5 miles, the shore presented no other curve which would permit of a return towards the north. It was evident that this promontory, the point of which they had turned, must be joined to the mainland. The castaways, although much fatigued, pushed on courageously, hoping each moment to find a sudden turn which would take them in the desired direction. What, then, was their disappointment when, after having walked nearly 2 miles, they found themselves again arrested by the sea, upon a high promontory of slippery rocks. "We are on an island," exclaimed Pencroff, "and we have measured it from end to end." The words of the sailor were true. The castaways had been thrown, not upon a continent, but upon an island not more than 2 miles long, and of inconsiderable breadth. This desert isle, covered with stones, without vegetation, desolate refuge of seabirds, did it belong to a more important archipelago? They could not tell. The party in the balloon, when from their basket they saw the land through the clouds, had not been able to determine its size. But Pencroff, with the eyes of a sailor accustomed to piercing the gloom, thought, at the moment, that he could distinguish in the west confused masses, resembling a high coast. But at this time they were unable, on account of the obscurity, to determine to what system, whether simple or complex, their isle belonged. They were unable to get off, as the sea surrounded them, and it was necessary to wait until the next day to search for the engineer, who, alas, had made no cry to signal his presence. "The silence of Cyrus proves nothing," said the reporter. "He may have fainted, or be wounded, and unable to reply, but we will not despair." The reporter then suggested the idea of lighting a fire upon the point of the island, which would serve as a signal for the engineer. But they searched in vain for wood or dry branches. Sand and stones were all they found. One can understand the grief of Neb and his companions, who were strongly attached to their brave comrade. It was too evident that they could not help him now, and that they must wait till day. The engineer had escaped, and was already safe upon the land, or he was lost forever. The hours were long and dreadful, the cold was intense, and the castaways suffered keenly, but they did not realize it. They did not think of sleep. Thinking only of their chief, hoping, wishing to hope, they moved back and forth upon that arid island, constantly returning to the northern end, where they would be closest to the place of the catastrophe. They listened, they shouted, they tried to catch some call, and, as a lull would come, or the roar of the surf fall with the waves, their halloos must have sounded far into the distance. Once the cry of Neb was answered by an echo, and Herbert made Pencroff notice it, saying, "That proves that there is land not far to the west." The sailor nodded. He knew his eyes could not deceive him. He thought he had seen land, and it must be there. But this distant echo was the only answer to the cries of Neb, and the silence about the island remained unbroken. Meanwhile the sky was clearing slowly. Towards midnight, some stars shone out, and, had the engineer been there with his companions, he would have noticed that these stars did not belong to the northern hemisphere. The pole star was not visible in this new horizon. The constellations in the zenith were not such as they had been accustomed to see from North America, and the Southern Cross shone resplendent in the heavens. The night passed, and towards 5 o'clock in the morning the middle heavens began to brighten, though the horizon remained obscure, until with the first rays of day, a fog rose from the sea, so dense that the eye could scarcely penetrate 20 paces into its depths, and separated into great, heavy-moving masses. This was unfortunate, as the castaways were unable to distinguish anything about them. While the gaze of Neb and the reporter was directed towards the sea, the sailor and Herbert searched for the land in the west, but they could see nothing. "Never mind," said Pencroff, "if I do not see the land. I feel that it is there, just as sure as that we are not in Richmond." But the fog, which was nothing more than a morning mist, soon rose. A clear sun warmed the upper air, its heat penetrating to the surface of the island. At 6:30, 3/4 of an hour after sunrise, the mist was nearly gone. Though still thick overhead, it dissolved, below, and soon all the island appeared, as from a cloud. Then the sea appeared, limitless towards the east, but bounded on the west by a high and abrupt coast. Yes, the land was there. There, safety was at least provisionally assured. The island and the main land were separated by a channel half a mile wide, through which rushed a strong current. Into this current one of the party, without saying a word or consulting with his companions, precipitated himself. It was Nebraska. He was anxious to be upon that coast and to be pushing forward towards the north. No one could keep him back. Pencroff called to him in vain. The reporter prepared to follow, but the sailor ran to him, exclaiming, "Are you determined to cross this channel?" "I am," replied Spilett. "Well, then, listen to me a moment. Neb can rescue his master alone. If we throw ourselves into the channel, we are in danger of being carried out to sea by this strong current. Now, if I am not mistaken, it is caused by the ebb. You see, the tide is going out. Have patience until low water and then we may ford it." "You are right," answered the reporter. "We will keep together as much as possible." Meantime, Neb was swimming vigorously in a diagonal direction, against the current. His black shoulders were seen rising with each stroke. He was drawn backward with swiftness, but he was gaining towards the other shore. It took him more than half an hour to cross the half-mile which separated the isle from the mainland, and when he reached the other side it was at a place a long distance from the point opposite to that which he had left. Neb, having landed at the base of a high rocky wall, clambered quickly up its side, and, running, disappeared behind a point projecting into the sea, about the same height as the northern end of the island. Neb's companions had watched with anxiety his daring attempt, and, when he was out of sight, they fixed their eyes upon that land from which they were going to demand refuge. They ate some of the shellfish which they found upon the sands. It was a poor meal, but then it was better than nothing. The opposite coast formed an immense bay, terminated to the south by a sharp point bare of all vegetation, and having a most forbidding aspect. This point at its junction with the shore was abutted by high granite rocks. Towards the north, on the contrary, the bay widened, with a shore more rounded, extending from the southwest to the northeast, and ending in a narrow cape. Between these 2 points, the distance must have been about 8 miles. A half-mile from the shore the island, like an enormous whale, lay upon the sea. Its width could not have been greater than 1/4 of a mile. Before the island, the shore began with a sandy beach strewn with black rocks, at this moment beginning to appear above the receding tide. Beyond this rose, like a curtain, a perpendicular granite wall, at least 300 feet high and terminated by a ragged edge. This extended for about 3 miles, ending abruptly on the right in a smooth face, as if cut by the hand of man. To the left, on the contrary, above the promontory, this kind of irregular cliff, composed of heaped-up rocks and glistening in the light, sank and gradually mingled with the rocks of the southern point. Upon the upper level of the coast not a tree was visible. It was a tableland, as barren though not as extensive as that around Cape Town, or at the Cape of Good Hope. At least so it appeared from the islet. To the right, however, and back of the smooth face of rock, some verdure appeared. The confused massing of large trees was easily distinguishable, extending far as the eye could reach. This verdure gladdened the sight tired by the rough face of granite. Finally, back of and above the plateau, distant towards the northwest about 7 miles, shone a white summit, reflecting the sun's rays. It was the snowy cap of some lofty mountain. It was not possible at present to say whether this land was an island or part of a continent, but the sight of the broken rocks heaped together on the left would have proved to a geologist their volcanic origin, as they were incontestably the result of igneous action. Gideon Spilett, Pencroff, and Herbert looked earnestly upon this land where they were to live, perhaps for long years, upon which, if out of the track of ships, they might have to die. "Well," demanded Herbert, "what do you think of it, Pencroff?" "Well," replied the sailor, "there's good and bad in it, as with everything else. But we shall soon see, for look, what I told you. In 3 hours we can cross, and once over there, we will see what we can do towards finding Mr. Smith." Pencroff was not wrong in his predictions. 3 hours later, at low tide, the greater part of the sandy bed of the channel was bare. A narrow strip of water, easily crossed, was all that separated the island from the shore. And at 10 o'clock, Spilett and his 2 companions, stripped of their clothing, which they carried in packages on their heads, waded through the water, which was nowhere more than 5 feet deep. Herbert, where the water was too deep, swam like a fish, acquitting himself well, and all arrived without difficulty at the other shore. There, having dried themselves in the sun, they put on their clothes, which had not touched the water, and took counsel together.